All right. And now for the main event, I'm going to ask our panelists to come on up to the stage as I read you some short bios. As you know, this year we are highlighting the 70th anniversary of the landmark Supreme Court decision Brown versus the Board of Education. And I'm reminded of a very brief encounter that I actually had with Ruby Bridges and how she will always tell you that the work didn't begin, it didn't end with her either, and so it's a continuing issue that needs to all of the effort and all of the passion that we feel in the room, certainly by the clients that we just heard from Greg's work and all the other the work that Leon and the folks at what is it, CFJJ, as we lovingly call it. So certainly this is work that's going to continue. And discussions like this are so important, especially the one we're about to have. So let's talk about the folks who are on this amazing panel. Although it's been 70 years since the abolishment of purposeful school segregation, our public schools remain deeply segregated, right? And there is so much work to be done to create equitable education for all children. Tonight, we are excited to present a panel of experts who will discuss a look back at the history following Brown and where we are today. I'm thrilled to call to the stage our panelists, former Boston Public Schools Chief Equity and Strategy Officer and founder and CEO of Global Ecosystem Leadership, Dr. Charles Granson. We also have, yes. I guess have a seat from the end. Yeah, there we go. Also with us is Medford School Committee member and the Mayors for Youth Employment Program Director for the City of Malden, Erin Olapade. And of course, you know her, you love her, founder and executive director of Black Advocates for Educational Excellence, Edith Bazile. And now I'm going to switch over to the other mic as we moderate our discussion here. Okay. Oh, there we go. Everybody okay? I feel like I'm hitting my mic. Am I hitting my mic? Sorry about that. So, Dr. Granson, I think we want to just sort of level set the history of Brown and talk to us a little bit about the key decisions and the actions that followed the Brown decision.
Okay. Thank you, Crystal, and I'd like to thank Michelle and everyone involved with YAF, and also Edith and Erin. And just really happy to be here tonight and to be a part of this panel. It's inspiring to just hear all the stories and to know that there are people out there who still care and who are still doing great work. 70 years. In 7 days, it'll actually make exactly 70 years because it was 1954, May 17th, right, that the Brown decision was laid out. And I appreciate the question. I think I want to start, though, with also looking at where we started, right, and how we got to Brown. And then I'll just give a little overview of Brown and then talk about where we've been since then. I'm going to start with a quote. "America is an old house. We can never declare the work over. When you live in an old house, you may not want to go into the basement after a storm to see what the rains have wrought. Choose not to look, however, at your own peril. The owner of an old house knows that whatever you are ignoring will never go away. Whatever is lurking will fester, whether you choose to look or not. Ignorance is no protection from the consequences of inaction." That's a quote by Isabel Wilkerson from her book Caste, if any of you all are familiar with that. Yeah, give it up for Isabel Wilkerson. And I thought it was really a good way to set the stage for the conversation, which has been a recurring conversation in our country. When you look at how we got to Brown, our house the state of Massachusetts is very much a part of that story. And so many of you all, I'm sure, are familiar with the Sarah Roberts case. And Roberts versus the city of Boston, Benjamin Roberts, Sarah Roberts' father, filed a lawsuit against the city of Boston because Sarah Roberts had to walk past 5 schools before she could before she could actually get to her school, which was a school that was for black students. And that was in 1849. And so it was actually the Massachusetts Supreme Court who denied Sarah Roberts access and denied black children access to an equal and fair public education. And the Massachusetts Supreme Court, with that precedent, would set the stage for the almost next 100 years in our country. Then we get to Brown versus Board of Education. And what's very interesting in going back and looking at some of this, you experience these things and you even teach them. I was a history teacher, and you go back and look at it and sort of relive it. And when we get through, we talked about that 100 years leading up to Brown. Kansas, there were 11 cases that were sort of the test cases that led up to what would be the 1954 Supreme Court decision. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the great Charles Hamilton Houston, who I believe there's a center at the law school there, and the late, great Charles Ogletree found it when he was at the law school, Harvard Law School. And Charles Hamilton Houston was a great Charles who was born in Washington, D.C., and made his way to schools in Massachusetts, like I did. And so he actually went to Amherst College, later Harvard Law School, and it was his brilliance that led to, he was sort of the architect of Brown. And Thurgood Marshall was his student who actually saw through the case, argued it before the Supreme Court, and unfortunately, Charles Hamilton Houston died 4 years before the decision. But it was his strategy as a part of the NAACP legal defense team to first try the cases as it related to graduate students in graduate schools around the country, and then get to what would be more hotly contested, which would be K-12 education. Brown, as I wrap up, itself, as we know, overturned the past 100 years and reaffirmed the 14th Amendment and stated that the segregation violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and that separate but equal could no longer be the law of the land, that it was not fair in providing quality education to African American students, and actually that it was detrimental to their well-being, mental health. This was significant and a very significant change for race relations in our country, but it also called for Brown 2. And so another Isabel Wilkerson quote I sort of have here is, caste is insidious and therefore powerful because it's not hatred. It is not necessarily personal. It is worn gloves of comforting routines and unthinking expectations, patterns of social order that have been in place for so long that it looks like the natural order of things. And that just speaks to, that just because there's a case, as many of you all in this room know, preaching to the choir, on a decision doesn't mean that there's going to be action. And so we need a Brown 2 to say this is how it needs to be implemented. Boston is right at the center of that story as well, as many of you all know, and many of the cases that came after Brown 2, for example, Charlotte Mecklenburg case there, argued for the use of busing to integrate schools, right? That was affirmed during that case in the 70s. Lastly, I'll say about Brown 2, it spoke to this idea of all deliberate speed, and that was a term that I remember very well, as Charles Ogletree wrote a book, I think it was back in 2007, with that title, and this idea that we were giving local entities time to actually implement Brown, and to be intentional about it, that it was a local responsibility and that there should be judicial oversight. Again, something we have experience with in Boston.
Yeah.
So I'll wrap up there. Yep, I know it was long, but I had to get that, lay out the history. And I, again, appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely, and certainly we'll touch upon some of those historical moments throughout the conversation. But Edith, I want to talk a little bit about the historical impact of the Brown decision on education of students of color. We saw some of that with your work with students and the videos and Elijah and things, but certainly talk to us about the impact, right, since Brown and Brown too.
So, thank you for that question. And I just want to say you all look lovely this evening. It's so good to be here around a collective community. I just feel like I'm sitting here getting a warm embrace. And I just want to thank YAP for all of the work that they've done, and it's such a pleasure to work with everyone. You know, I guess what I want to say, Crystal, is my parents came here from Mississippi. And after my father served in World War II, he went back to a lot of lynchings, and it was tough in the South. And so he came here and moved on to Beacon Hill. He lived in Beacon Hill in the late 1940s. There's been a lot of great stuff happening on Beacon Hill. Black folks, since slavery was abolished, worked hard to open up the first school. I think it was Prince Hall opened the school in 1733. So there's been a fight for equity in education. We have the African Meeting House, where they launched the first integrated school in 1855. So we really have a long history in Massachusetts of being firsts. First public school, first black school, first integrated school. I like to sit on that in terms of thinking about the struggles and also the achievements that have been made in this great state. Do we have a lot of work to do? Absolutely. You know, in thinking about, it was only about 150 years ago that we had laws that banned black students from reading. Literacy was against the law. And I think what Brown did is it said, it codified the right of black students in particular to be able to go to schools that not only exposed them to literacy, but it was a fight for equity. Equity was the issue. How do we have equitable schools, despite the fact that there were freedom schools, there were schools that were designed for black students, and integrated schools right here in Massachusetts, they were not equal. They didn't get equal funding, they didn't have equal staffing, they didn't have materials that were respectable. And so I think as we look at the history and the struggle, equity is still the elusive dream that we are trying to pursue collectively. And it really is about equitable funding, seeing the full humanity of students, and saying that I, sitting here as a black child, I went to schools during segregation, and my younger siblings, because I came from a family of 14, so we have a lot of history there. Two-parent family, we owned a house. My parents moved to Roxbury and bought a 3-family house and then filled it up with all of us. Eating on the first floor, girls on the second floor, boys and parents on the 3rd floor. So it was a very lively upbringing. But as I think about that and I look at desegregation, you know, it wasn't about integration. It was really about having books that were new, having curriculum that was rigorous, being able to have access to a pathway to college and career. And I think we are still struggling in that way. Many people who fought for the abolishment of slavery, for access and opportunities, I mean, we have to have a conversation about what does equity look like. It's not okay just to eliminate segregation. We must pursue equity. So I think we've made progress. There's so much more to be made. We know what to do. It really has to do with having the policies, the practices, the procedures, and the access in order to make that happen.
That's right. So, it's right. Go ahead and clap. All right. So we talked about how we've gotten here. Let's talk about where we're going now. And Aaron, this is a question for you. As a student, in Medford and someone who is now on the school committee, what do you see as the evidence of differential treatment of students? And we're talking in terms of race, income, and disability.
That's a great question, and I want to say thank you to everyone. Much like my panelists, I'm so, I think, blessed and privileged to be up here with the rest of them and be able to be in this space with you all, so thank you. I think when we talk about educational equity as an idea, as a concept, we haven't even agreed on what that is yet. How do we achieve it at large? So when we think about where we've come from 70 years ago, we determined that segregation, the separation by race, is unconstitutional. But we didn't determine what systems we were going to then put in place to create an equitable experience in the classroom. So even in the same classrooms today, the same cities, the same districts, our students don't have the same access to the education that they're supposed to be learning, that they're supposed to be retaining. And I think that when I look at my own district that I went through as a public school student and now that I'm advocating for on the school board, I think that we see the disproportionate suspension rate, the disproportionate amount of treatment of students based off of economic ability, of racial ability, of ableism. Our students are treated differently, and that their access to the education in the same classroom is inaccessible. We see students, and we understand that out-of-school suspensions don't work. And in some ways, in-school suspensions don't work. And that's because the way we're offering the education, the way that we want our students to retain that content, it doesn't come the same for each and every student. And when we think about internal and external factors, cultural, racial, economic, for example, those things directly affect your ability to understand the content. And if we as educators, we as advocates aren't actually acknowledging that, connecting our own experience to the experience of the students, what chance do they have? How do we make it accessible to them? And I think that when I got through high school and went to college, that was my big question. That was how I wanted to continue my work, is understanding how I can be a true advocate. It's easy to say, I want to work with these students, I want to serve these students, but how are we truly serving them day to day? The intentionality is what I think guides me day to day, and I think it should be what guides each of us to serve our students.
Well said, well said. I want to move to what we can do now. Where do we go from here? Because I think that talking about solutions is the point of all of the work that we do here in this building. I know I've reported on different initiatives by the state to increase teacher diversity, to reimagine what a student who is differently abled in the classroom looks like, and how do we identify those students and get the services that they need. But Dr. Grant, I'd love to talk to you about where do you see as some of the solutions that you have seen are working, and what we need to do better to build upon those, because I know that you serve different levels of education, from teaching to superintendent's office to ops and things like that.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. I think it really comes down to, leadership matters. And it's not just leadership at the highest levels, but leadership in our classrooms, leadership in our community. We go back to some of the examples Edith provided when we talked about Sarah Roberts. It was African American parents, families, educators who stood up, who pushed to get those cases brought forward. And we have to get back to that in a very grassroots way in our communities. And so I'm very proud of some of the work that I did and folks like Edith in the Boston Public Schools, where during the height of the pandemic, we opened our practice, right? We created this thing called a Community Equity Roundtable. And it's about bringing voices to the table with this idea that the expertise lies with those who are most impacted by the work. And that is the students, that's the teachers, those are the individuals who are serving in our schools, or those individuals who are serving in our juvenile justice system, and other partners. And so I think those kind of strategies are important for bringing people together to figure out innovative solutions, different approaches. That approach in BPS during the pandemic allowed us to identify every individual student and made sure that teachers were looking at data and then getting in their cars and driving, right, those devices directly to students in their homes. And it took an international pandemic and something that really shook the foundation of our education system in order to do that. But it allowed us to see what's possible, right, if we think outside of the box.
Yeah. Edith, same question. What do you see has worked, is working, and needs to be better?
Well, first of all, I want to say to paraphrase the great Malcolm X, we've all been bamboozled, hoodwinked, and lied to. And we've been given a system that has the remnants of colonial thinking coming out of slavery. And unless we have an intentional conversation, because let me just say this, and I want to be very clear with this. When I went to school, yes, we were very poor. We didn't take any handouts. My father said, if you don't have any lunch, you don't take a handout. And I'll tell you, to this day, I can smell those warm ginger cookies and those bologna sandwiches and peanut butter and jelly that I couldn't eat. However, my teachers felt that because I was poor, that I wasn't capable. They weren't mean. They weren't racist. They thought that this poor girl from Roxbury who had 13 siblings and you never saw my parents because they were too busy, was not capable of learning. And so when I wrote something that was really high level, they thought that I plagiarized. So I got in trouble and I learned to dumb my work down. What we have to dismantle is not just systems, but thinking about what poverty means, what it means to be black, what it means to come from that neighborhood, what it means if your parents can't come to school because they are working 3 jobs and they don't have the time. We need to understand what it means when a child who came from trauma, because poverty creates trauma. It doesn't affect your brain, it still works. My brain worked fine. I could read, I wanted to learn, but because I was hungry and poor and I didn't talk, because my parents said, when you go to school, keep your mouth shut, don't talk about our business, and I don't want any calls. If I get a call, you're gonna be in trouble. So I think it means understanding what difference truly means. And when my teacher said that I was not college material, in fact, they told my parents that I had borderline intelligence. For me, I thought my teachers were stupid. I'm like, no, you're the one. You are the one. But that's unusual. We often talk about children being resilient. Children should not have to be resilient against systems that don't work for them. And so I knew because I saw what the violence and what poverty creates. Poverty creates desperation. It creates people who don't have things that others take for granted. And you know what? We're all gonna eat. If I don't have food and you have food, guess what? I'm gonna wait until you're not looking, or maybe I'm gonna just take your food in front of you because I'm hungry. And so we have to really think about the systems that we create and dismantle our thinking about why. Why is it that we place black students in the back of the classroom? Why do we deny them access to AP courses, honor courses, exam schools? Why are they in special education? Why don't they respond to our questions, which could be insulting? And so it really has to do with thinking about the system that we were all inducted to, whether you have privilege or you were like me on the other end, that I'm black and I'm poor and I come from a neighborhood where you think nothing good comes out of. And that is the problem. So we need to have an intentional conversation about that. We need to unpack, unlearn, dismantle our thinking in order to have the tools, strategies, and the perspective to dismantle systems that were perpetuated because of this haves and have-not situation. If I take my candle and I light your candle, you don't have less light, you have more.
That's right.
And there's a perception that when you allow poor black children to go in certain schools and neighborhoods in numbers, then that's gonna drive the achievement down. We now see attack on DEI, we see an attack on affirmative action, where from our perspective, white folks have had affirmative action for for a long time. And we have not had a piece of that pie, even though we built this country. You know, when slavery ended, white folks were given reparations for losing their property. And so we have to really think about that. Is it your fault that you have privilege? Absolutely not. And I'm talking to you white folks, okay? I hope you don't mind. Let's just have a conversation. But what I mean by that is we are all in this together. And I want to end by saying that Martin Luther King has a quote, and I'm just going to paraphrase it again. And it goes something like, I can't be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you cannot be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. That's the interrelatedness of society. We don't know whose child is going to marry and fall in love and marry someone else's child. And so if I am that child that came from the have-nots and you are the family of the haves, we may be connected, and that's the real interconnectedness. We are that close in society, and we saw that from the pandemic. So I think we have to fix this. We have to fix our thinking, fix our minds, and we have to get together and collectively say, as Malcolm X said, we have been bamboozled, duped, lied to, and then we have to resist that and say enough is enough. We have to have a system that works for everyone because we don't have another world to escape to. This is it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well said. Aaron, I think out of all of us on the panel, if I can take the liberty of saying, is closest to the actual school system in terms of being a student. Talk to me about what you see as the substantive change that needs to happen so that we do get to the equity, to the equality, to even the parity that we've been talking about tonight.
Yeah, I think that, de Tocqueville said something in his Democracy in America piece about how we are the epicenter of modern democracy. And I think eventual equality, that he believed that our early democracy was the great experiment, as he called it. And I love that because I think it considers how we are just one or two changes away, one or two generations away from a completely different set of systems than what we currently have. We're always in a constant state of flux as this United Nations, as the United States, and in some ways it speaks to our fragility. We are so incredibly fragile, and we always are ready to make a change that is both positive or negative. And it's up to us as, I think, the adults, the ones with more experience, to usher in the changes, those changes being the generations to come after us. We have an opportunity to consider the humility, the faith, and the hope that we all should be carrying with us as we walk our students through the gates of adulthood. When I think about trying my best to, I think, advocate and support the young people I work with, there's a sense of humility you need to hold every conversation because I don't have all the answers. I don't know how best to support you and serve you. And I think that my colleagues and my peers at my age don't either. Right? We need to constantly be open to learning new things and understanding better how we can support the generation that are currently living in today's world. That then makes me think about the faith that I have, the faith that the system that we currently have is flawed. But I also see moments, I see individuals like this room of people who do care, who do want to see change for our young people. And then it gives me hope. It gives me a hope, a sense of belief that we can create a system for the younger generation so that they can then lead their generation after them. So it leads with hope, faith, and humility. Those three, I think, tenets are what give me purpose. And I think it should give each of you purpose because those three things are things that you can do every day. Those are intentional changes in the way that you approach conversations with young people, especially in moments where these young people feel as though they don't have a way forward. They don't feel as though that their value is evident, but their value is intrinsic. And we need to lead them. We need to make them understand that they do have value. Their individualism, their sense of self is valuable. And we need to levy that in a way that hasn't been done before, so that as we continue to move through this great experiment, the generations to come are the ones who are truly leading us properly.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I want to go ahead. in a true Socratic method, I would love to open it up for a brief Q&A here to our panel. If anyone has any questions. Yes, Judge.
So how about the reality that 70 years after Brown, our schools are more segregated than they were at the time of Brown because of lack of adequate funding of certain school districts. So that's part of the cradle to prison pipeline, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So the question for folks who didn't hear was talking about how school systems are, or school districts are more segregated even now than right after Brown in some ways. And so bringing that question to the panel about what they think about that, and I think solutions to change that. Yeah, Edith?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thank you, Judge Jay, for asking that. I think it is the reification of segregation. When you have a machine bureaucracy, which school systems are, there's a looping effect. You change something, and that bureaucracy has a way of coming back to recreating that inequity. Because this, and that's why we need reform. When we talk about dismantling systems of equity, it means to create a new structure, but you have to dismantle the thinking behind the structure that you have. And so, yes, we have resegregation, but guess what we also have? We have a huge transportation bill. So in my district, Boston Public Schools, we have Charlestown High School that is chronically underperforming. Only 4% of the students live in the neighborhood. And this is a school that has a low graduation rate, disproportionate representation of segregation and special education, the whole 9 yards. Students go through the tunnel, they spend more than an hour being transported to a school that is chronically underperforming. So you say, how does this happen? We have to look at the root cause of it, which is the assignment algorithms. I live in this neighborhood, I can't go to this, that, or the other school, but I have to go all the way across to a different neighborhood that has a school that has primarily black students in it. The system has a way of looping itself back into that mindset. And so we still have the status quo. We have students who live in certain parts of Boston, like Mattapan, who have a 1% chance of attending a high-performing school. If you live in the North End, the Back Bay, in West Roxbury, your chances of attending a high-achieving school is 85 to 90%. And so this has to do with how systems talk to each other and who created those systems. And that's what we have to look at. We always talk about, what we can do to make a school better, but we don't get to the root cause. The root cause is that we dump a whole bunch of kids who are black and brown in the same underperforming school with understaffing, teachers who are not very experienced, and with a crumbling infrastructure. And then we have other schools that have cutting-edge, state-of-the-art facilities, like the McKinley schools, no gym, no cafeteria, no science lab. I mean, how do you expect students to perform? There's no equity there. So
Yeah, I think we're going to take, you're right. I just want to take one more question just so that we have it. Yes, ma'am.
So when the three of you are out and about and meet people, like, let's say, an urban teacher in the majority underserved population around black students, and I come to you and I say, what is your best advice? What would you tell me? What is one thing I can do? Because I have a tremendous responsibility to use my privilege to advocate for my students in effective, meaningful ways. So what would you say how to do that? Or what would you give to the people here who are not school teachers, who have other facets of their lives? Like, what is your one thing you would say? If you meet a school teacher,
So the question is for folks who may not heard is if you meet, if one of the panelists meets a school teacher, what piece of advice would the panel give that teacher in order to create an environment of equity, inclusion, and belonging? And I'll start with you, Dr. Granson.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, I think when you're in the teacher's lounge or in the faculty meeting and you feel that pit at the bottom of your stomach because you know what people are saying is not the right thing, and you have to decide when and how to do this to survive, right? But you got to speak up, right? And you got to say something, and you got to say, no, actually, I don't think that's the case, or we know better, right? And we can do better. And that's not easy, right? I've been there as a teacher, being that person. And then the next time you come to the teacher's lounge, everybody turns their head, right, or put their head down, right? Great, I'll go eat in my classroom with the students. That's fine. But you know, so I think that is going to be that's really important, and that's not just in classrooms in schools. That's in every industry and field all of us working.
Mm-hmm. Aaron.
I think that, and I don't want to put more burden on the teachers in some way, but I will say that I think get to know your students. They have so much to offer, and I think that a lot of the time they don't feel quite comfortable yet letting themselves be themselves. I know that a lot of students that I've worked with or peers of mine when I was growing up didn't feel like they had a space to speak their minds or say where they were feeling like they didn't understand what was going on. It wasn't just because they didn't want people to know that they didn't get the content, but they didn't want to impose themselves on the authorities in the room or on the administration in the schools. And I think that allowing students to be their full selves will create a sense of camaraderie in the classroom that you really haven't seen before. Students are so much more willing to offer up their interests, their ideas, their willingness to be a student. And knowledge should not be a question. It should be something that is apparent. It should be something that should be evident. We should be offering that up to each student, and students want that. We have to connect our experiences with theirs as soon as possible so that they feel like they can take in what we want to offer them. And that starts with getting to know them. That starts with trying to understand them. And that's not going to happen immediately. That's not going to happen on the first day of school during syllabus week. That might take the whole year or multiple years. But showing up matters. Showing up means something, and students will eventually understand that, and they'll see that, and they might not even tell you. Being a teacher is thankless. We know that. It is an incredibly thankless job more often than not, but students remember, students recognize, and they will remember that type of intentionality of commitment to them for years and years to come, and you might not know it, but understand that it's happening.
Edith, I'll give you the final word here.
All right, so I'll try to be quick. First of all, thank you for the question, and I would say thank you for your service. Because it matters that you're there. It matters that teachers have you as students have you as a life raft. And I would say give yourself oxygen and make sure that you're engaging in self-care, because it's tough being an educator. I would also say that you matter in terms of that kind word, that kind gesture. That makes a difference. I did not have a teacher that believed in me. You know, and so I say that I survived my education. I didn't thrive. I had not one teacher that said, you're smart, or any positive. You know, that makes a big difference. Teacher expectations drives students' performance. And if you don't believe in me, I can't perform in your class. And what I mean by believing in me, don't think that I am my trauma. Something happened to me. I'm in this situation of poverty through no fault of my own. I walk to school with the same clothes or with holes in my shoes. I'm in pain, I'm sad, I'm depressed. But you know what? I still want to learn. Give me rigor. Give me a challenge. Let me know that my future is going to be better. When I was in school, my local librarian, I would say, you know that song, how that song goes, last night a DJ saved my life? Well, a librarian saved my life, because my local librarian gave me books. I read Black Boy, and that resonated with me. You know why? Because I was hungry all the time. I didn't have no food. And I couldn't take that, you know, peanut butter and jelly sandwich from that teacher as much as I wanted. It was torture. But I couldn't take it. And they thought there was something wrong with me. But what I'm saying is a kind gesture to a child. You don't have to know their business, their story. They may not tell you, I was threatened not to say anything. students may come from that perspective, but know that there is no such thing as a child who does not want to learn. There's no such thing. You go to war-torn countries, children are still, writing words in the dirt. They're playing games and they're playing with vocabulary. Children want to learn. So believing in children and modeling that. But you also need professional development. That's what I went into in my profession, because teachers need the tools, the strategies, and the resources to do the work. And most often, if you are working in schools that are filled with students who are challenging, because they all take us and they put us in the same school together, and that's a setup for failure. You're not going to have those cutting edge resources. And assume that the parents want their children to do better than what they are, what they have done, whether they're in jail or they're struggling with their own personal issues, or homeless. Parents want their children to be better than them, even if they don't articulate. Shame comes with poverty.
Yes.
There's shame involved, and so understanding but not pitying, because charity is not equity. And we don't want a handout, we want a hand up.
Right. Very well said. Well, I'm sure we could talk about this all night long, but we have a few other things to do. And I know Edith in the panel, will be around for the ice cream sundaes afterwards. So 2 reasons to stay. So I want to thank our panel. Thank you so much as we move on to the next item.